Hello, dear listeners. Last time we left off, Leonard Tramiel was just telling us about how his family had bought Atari and was cleaning house to stop the $2 million a day bleed and making tough choices to be able to get their new machine that would be redubbed the Atari ST into production. We're going to jump right back in, but if you haven't heard the first half of this, well, there may be a few things that may not have all the context that you need, so please go and check that out. Have fun. Gotcha. Now, so that is developing, and you guys need to now figure out a way to stop the bleeding. So staff is cut. Atari already has a line of products, both video game and home computer. Right. What was your assessment of the value of those products, and how did you go about trying to turn them into a sellable commodity at that point?
Well, they already were. They were selling. The goal was to sell them for as long as they lasted, because there was lots of stuff in inventory, and to have enough cash flow to fund the development and the launch of the ST, and dump them all at that point and just stop. Now, that isn't what happened, because the ST took longer to get going, and it didn't take off as quickly as we wanted. Dad had no interest whatsoever in producing video games, but all he could sell was, a significant amount of what he had to sell were video games. So he sold them.
Gotcha. Now, and this does beg a question, because I've heard you say in the past that your father had seen, I believe, the Commodore 64 as a tool for education.
Uh-huh.
And obviously the C64 is remembered today, despite the many educational and productivity applications, largely as a games machine by many people. What was his reaction to that reputation that the machine had?
Couldn't care less.
Couldn't care less. Okay.
The fact is that most of the people that used the machine used it for games. Most of the impact that it had on society was making people that were computer literate. Most of what the machine, quote, did was educational, even if most of the uses of it weren't. And he was intensely aware of that.
Very true. Very, very true. That is, sorry, that was beautiful just now. Okay, so back to the ST. Like you said, the ST took a little bit longer to get steam. Now, was that an issue of manufacturing? Was it an issue of getting it into distribution channels? What was holding the ST back, in your opinion?
The IBM PC. The IBM PC was finally really getting momentum. And the ST was a much more expensive machine than a Commodore 64. Had some fairly obvious business applications. The monochrome mode of the ST, the 640 by 480 monochrome display was great for word processors and spreadsheets and all that stuff. Lots of power, but trying to get it into the business market was a lot harder than he thought it was going to be. It was easier in Europe, where we joked that the phrase "no one was ever fired for buying IBM" had never been translated into German. But which I suspect is untrue. But the ST had a lot more success overseas. So I think that was a large amount of the problem. You're going to hear lots of, well, it was because of my dad's reputation that people didn't want to deal with him. There was certainly some of that, but there were an awful lot of people that were eager to deal with him because no one likes a winner more than people that like winners. And when you win, it doesn't matter. The fact is, although he was ruthless, he was also, I'll call it pathologically honest. And if he gave his word, he would keep it. Period. And the people that dealt with him knew that and appreciated it.
So the international sales of the system, and over here in Europe, it really does take off. It becomes that next step, especially because there were no game consoles, or they had very little penetration at that point. And in the U.S., like you said, the game systems continue to sell. Right. You also then do several revamps of the Atari 8-bit computer line. There's new variations on the 800, I believe, and
the 65XE.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then also the game console version of the consoles. That's a lot of different products out at the same time. Was that something that made it more or less difficult to get into distribution in the U.S.? Because of all the different
I think it made it easier because it gave you entree into different distribution channels.
Gotcha. And you've already talked about how the title of Vice President of Software is a little bit more ceremonial than anything else.
Yeah.
But did you have what was your relationship like with developers of software and with the internal software development for both the ST and the console systems?
So there was very little internal console or game development software. That was done almost completely by external people. And that was a known commodity that there were no technical issues on that, so I was not involved at all. I was in charge of the internal ST group. And I was a pretty important part of the technical outreach to developers for the ST. So I went to several meetings all around the world for, answering questions, showing people how to develop for the ST. I remember there was a new version of something coming out. I don't remember what it was. And they really wanted an afternoon, where they could ask questions and get a demo and see how the process worked. So I got on a plane, flew to Germany, arrived in the morning, set up, did the presentation that afternoon, had dinner, went to sleep, got back on the plane, and came home.
Wow.
That sucked.
I will take your word for it. That sounds pretty, that
brutal.
would not be fun. That would not be fun.
Yeah.
Now,
definitely spent more time on the plane in each direction.
Yeah.
Than I did in the meetings.
Wow. And now I'm doing this interview from across the ocean over the computer, which is probably the way you would solve that problem today.
Hell yeah.
Well, speaking of software for the ST, we've talked about how it did have a graphic user interface. Yeah. That was provided by Gary Kildall's company, DRI. So what was that process like? Were they the first choice for developing the operating system, or did you go to somebody else first?
We went to Microsoft first. There were two possibilities for an operating system. One was Digital Research and their CP/M operating system. The other was Microsoft and MS-DOS. Microsoft was also working on this new amazing thing called Windows, which no one had seen yet. There were sneak peeks. We went to Microsoft, met microscopically briefly with Gates, but mostly with other people. And we explained what we were going to do and what the restrictions and limitations and our plans were. And they said, okay, that's great. We would love to produce the software for this, but our system is based on the Intel chips. And if you are going to do it on a 68,000, it will add a year to the development time to make it available. And I went, wait a minute, are you writing this in assembler? I thought this was all written in C. And they said, yes, it is written in C, but the way we do software at Microsoft is each C compiler is custom built for the application and the processor. It compiles to a bytecode that is customized to the application and the processor, and then an interpreter runs that. So in order to switch from a x86 to a 68,000, we'll add a year to the process.
Wow.
And after I picked my jaw off the floor, I said, okay. And we went to DRI and had a fantastic meeting with Gary Kildall and his group, who went, okay, this is what we've got. And the guy who was operating it walked in with a PC under his arm and plopped it on the table and showed it to us. And we said, well, we're not going to be running on an x86. We're running on a 68,000. He said, it's written in C. Who cares? Which was what I expected them to say at Microsoft. And that was it. There were no other options, unless we wanted to write it ourselves. And it was, we didn't have the people. We didn't have the expertise. We didn't have the couple of years it would take. It was hard enough to do the hardware from scratch, which we did. But the software was, so we had to do a port of the operating system, the underlying operating system, and we had to do the port from one graphics architecture to another graphics architecture of the graphics libraries. And then we also had to do the x86 to 68,000 transformation, which was not the year that Microsoft required, but it was certainly work. And that all had to be done in 6 months. And it was tricky.
Yes, I would expect as much, but you guys still got the product done on time.
Yeah, it was amazing. There was one custom chip that was not ready for CES. So we didn't have a floppy controller. So everything was on cartridges, but that was fine. There was trying to remember his name, and it's fallen out of my head, but there was one of the regular columnists for various computer magazines who refused to believe that the demo he was seeing on the ST ran on an ST. He was convinced there was a DEC mini computer in the booth in the back, and we were just seeing a mock-up.
No way.
So we went, okay, here. We got an adapter thingy that you screw into a light bulb that gave you a 110 volt socket. And we took the computer and we moved it to the middle of the floor, plugged a lamp into the floor, said, you pick which one, and ran it off of that. And he went, okay, I believe you. Because he just could not believe that we had gone from nothing to working chips with all the software in 6 months.
Wow.
And frankly, we were having trouble believing it too. But we had done it. It was hard.
I'll believe it. Now, the ST line gets a lot of updates over its lifespan. There's a bunch of different versions. Each one tweaks the hardware a little bit more. There's a bunch of additional features that get added with later iterations of the platform. Now,
well, I mean, there were changes in the cosmetics. There were things that were added in, whether it was an internal modulator, a internal disk drive, a hard drive, stuff like that. But the core chipset was identical until the STE.
Okay.
There was one chip another chip that didn't get done in time, the blitter. That got added. But that was basically it. There was the ST with blitter, and the STE.
Gotcha.
And then there was the TT.
And then the TT. And then ultimately the Falcon.
And the Falcon.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, for example, in the case of the blitter, was the non-inclusion of the blitter in the original model or any of the other features that get added later, did that end up being a handicap for developers? Did developers were they reluctant to take advantage of those additional features because of the lack of backwards compatibility?
The interface for the blitter was built into the operating system. So you use the software the same way you use the hardware. So they were completely compatible. So not much of an issue there. There was some, it was hard to get people to write code for the STE, that wouldn't run on the ST, because you didn't have the installed base. That was an issue, but it wasn't in the case of the blitter.
Oh, okay. Now, was there ever any plans to do a clean break similar to the break between the PET, the VIC, and the C64 with the Atari lines?
So we didn't really think of there being clean breaks in the Commodore line because they were all machines that ran in BASIC, and the BASIC was the same.
Okay.
So they were thought of as compatible, and there were differences in the output, resolution and the like, but they were the same machine. And an awful lot of software, ran on all three.
Yeah.
Not a lot of games.
I was about to say, yeah, as long as it was basic programs, it wasn't a problem.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Now, and I know you've written about this as a blog post, and I will point to that in the show notes, but concerning BASIC for the old Commodore machines, I know we're jumping back and forth. You did have a fun little anecdote about an encounter with Bill Gates at a trade show.
Yeah.
I have to ask you to repeat it here, if I may.
So Bill was leading a small procession of Japanese businessmen, and he walks into our suite. And it was obvious to me what he was doing. And he was demonstrating that Microsoft BASIC was at the core of our machine. And he had left an Easter egg in. When you typed wait 6502, the next parameter to that instruction would print the word Microsoft that number of times on the screen. We removed it. He had not told us that he had put it in. We had not told him that we had taken it out. He typed it in, wait 6502, 10. He hit the machine, and of course it froze because the Easter egg was gone. And I very quietly whispered to him, Bill, you know there's nothing at that address. It's just going to hang. And he looked at me in a very non-friendly manner, and then loud enough for everyone else to hear, said, your BASIC is a vital and important part of this machine. We're very happy that we have included Microsoft BASIC. And he let me live.
Sorry. I can just imagine Bill Gates in that point. The look on his face after
he was not pleased.
Yeah, after watching excerpts of his depositions back in the day, and how flustered he could get, I can just imagine that face. That would be interesting.
Yeah, Bill's a great guy. Knows his shit. Very technically competent. Really smart. Can get fixated in certain directions. If you use the Commodore 64, you're probably familiar with the on-screen editor. That allowed you to, the screen was this live thing, which doesn't exist except in word processors now. And I think that's something I would love to see included in modern machines. Bill didn't understand it. He thought it was a waste of time, didn't know why it was useful. Kept telling us to take it out. It made made interface to BASIC more complicated. We said, don't worry about it, we'll write it. I don't know if he ever realized what an incredibly powerful thing it was or not. But yeah, it's fine.
My very first attempts at artwork on a computer was Petsky art using that. Just scrolling down to the bottom for the top part to be gone, clear page, and then having the manual on my side. I'm 9 years old, figuring out, okay, which combinations will give me which colors and then which symbols are where, and just spending hours making pictures on this screen.
Yeah, I was very pleased with how, I'm not an artist. But I did manage to put together a character set that worked decently.
Yeah. Well, there's still people making whole games using it nowadays.
Yeah.
It's insane. But okay, back, and I don't want to be outstaying my welcome. We're at an hour 50 already.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay. As long as you're fine. So Atari is up and running. The ST is getting ready to go. Now, there are a variety of lawsuits that go back and forth between Commodore and Atari. Some of them concern the Amiga. There's a bunch of other ones. I don't want to go into the nitty-gritty of all of those, but my primary question is, how big of an issue were those lawsuits at the time for you guys? Was it something that really ate up a lot of energy in the company? And was it something that you think may have negatively affected Atari and or Commodore or both at this moment in time, especially as the IBM was rising?
So nothing that had anything to do with the ST had anything to do with Atari. From a design, implementation, intellectual property point of view, so it had no effect whatsoever. On the other hand, when there are lawyers at your door saying you aren't, we're going to stop you from going to work because you're being sued, that was an issue. So the people that were part of TTL that came to Atari, that were named in lawsuits, did have some interaction there, but Dad did everything he could to minimize that. But it was a non-issue. I think from the Commodore point of view, it saved Commodore. So in early 1984, a group of ex-Atari engineers, headed by Jay Miner, had developed this thing called the Amiga. And they went to Atari and said, we need money to make this real, to put these ideas into silicon. And Atari said, okay, we'll give you $500,000 for your next step. You're an ongoing business. If you can sell this idea to other people and get some upfront money, you can pay us back. And that'll be fine. Otherwise, we own your chips. And we'll do it. And we didn't know, and the people coming in didn't know about this. It's pretty clear no one at Warner knew much about this. Or at least the people that were selling the Atari portion, the consumer portion of Atari to Tramiel Technology knew anything about it. Two days, I don't remember exactly, very soon before the deadline of that 6 months, Commodore gave Amiga the money to pay back Atari, eliminating Atari's ownership rights to the Amiga, which we didn't want anyway. And Commodore winds up with the Amiga. And if Commodore didn't wind up with Amiga, there would have been no Commodore. It's pretty clear that they had no idea how to move forward. I think I would love to see an alternate history of what would have happened with Commodore if Dad had stayed. So you asked about a clean break with a new thought. So the TED machines at Commodore, which became this massive convoluted mess of things with the 264 and 364 and all sorts of other stuff. If you just look at the TED itself, TED stands for text display. That was a $50 machine that could hook up to a TV and be a full-fledged computer. $50. imagine what that could have been. Not a lot of game potential, no sprites, all of that stuff. Wouldn't have been too hard to make it work with higher resolution monitors. I think that really would have taken off. But no one at Commodore had anything that resembled any vision. I think all of the vision, all the technological vision from a, quote, marketing point of view, at Commodore was from Amiga. And when the Amiga dropped into their lap, they took it and ran. And I got to give them credit for doing a hell of a job.
Yeah, they milked it for a long time.
Yep.
But when it came time to actually develop it further, they again dropped the ball. There was nothing.
Well, they had no drive. They had no vision. They had no clue what they had.
Yeah.
And I mean, at some level, the Amiga exists as a memory because of the video toaster.
Yeah, in many ways, yeah.
And that was not something that Jay had in mind. I don't think it was not designed so that you could do a video toaster. Its design allowed the video toaster to be done. But that's a very different thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the Macintosh. The Macintosh would have crashed and burned, completely failed, if not for desktop publishing.
True.
Steve Jobs knew that desktop publishing as a concept. He knew that graphics and multiple fonts were an important thing, but he didn't have the idea of desktop publishing. If desktop publishing had not happened, if it did not become the killer app for the Mac would have died. The video toaster did it for the Amiga. I don't think there really was one for the ST, although at some level its entree into the music business was important. And we put the MIDI ports in there because we thought that was neat and it would be a nice thing to have. But we had no idea that it was going to, make or break the machine.
And the MIDI, that is an interesting point because the MIDI port on the ST does become I think it's fair to say, the killer app for the system because a lot of musicians still use their STs for that purpose to this day.
Yeah.
And you guys just did it because it was cool.
We did it because it was a great idea. It didn't cost much. It gave us a niche. And the thought was, it will drive enough business to help the initial startup of acceptance. But IBM had swallowed the market whole.
And what was the internal strategies at Atari in light of that ever-growing dominance of the IBM PC, especially in the U.S., in the home market? Was there any attempt to shift the product line in a way that might be able to counteract that? Was there any what was the thinking about how to deal with the IBM issue?
The thinking was to think of some way to find a market niche that IBM hadn't already eaten. But that turned out to not be doable. the only possibility was the artist market and desktop publishing, which Apple had taken. We did not have a solution. If we had, you would have known about
it. Now, we talked a little bit about this already, but machines like the 2600 keep getting produced by Atari all the way into the early 90s.
Yep.
The Atari 8-bit line keeps getting produced. New games are even coming out for the systems. How did the strategy work there? How did the relationships with retailers for these products work? I mean, was it something that it was easy to get retailers to still stock?
Oh, yeah. I mean, people wanted them. Mm-hmm. People like to play video games. If we're going to, so people like to play video games. We needed revenue. Mm. We're going to keep making them.
Gotcha. Now, and this is something we haven't talked about yet. When you guys come into Atari, Atari has relationships, I'm guessing, with pre-existing relationships with manufacturers overseas for production of all the machines. Uh-huh. But at the same time, they also have a massive built-up inventory of units. Did you guys stop all of that existing production and first just use up the inventory and then find new people to work with for the manufacturing, or did you continue using the same production facilities that old Atari, Warner Atari, had been using?
I think so I'm going to, again, when we came in, I was working on the ST, and we were completely insulated from everything else. So I don't know. Those people were 100 feet away. I never saw them.
Okay.
But, I mean, lots of relationships remained. So a lot of the stuff was taking advantage of relationships that we had from Commodore, where we couldn't use the stuff that we had stopped with Atari. But I don't know what the mix was.
Okay, cool. Now, moving forward in time, there was one major lawsuit against Nintendo, and it ran parallel to Atari Games, the arcade makers, also suing Nintendo in a completely separate suit over their Tengen line. But the Atari suit, your Atari suit against Nintendo, as far as I understood, it was largely about Nintendo using strong-arm tactics on both retailers and developers to try to maintain their stranglehold on the market.
Yeah, it was an antitrust suit.
Antitrust suit. So now, what was the approach there, and especially you as, and put in quotation marks, vice president of software, what was the manifestation? How did Nintendo's tactics actually affect day-to-day operations and relationships for Atari?
Well, if someone wanted to make a video game, then if you're a software company and you want to sell a video game, it's got to work on various pieces of hardware. A big chunk, the majority of the installed base was Nintendo. Nintendo said, if you want to sell on our machines, it can't work on the other stuff. Therefore, it ain't going to work on our stuff. That happens to be illegal under the Sherman Antitrust Act. So they got sued.
Now, obviously that case did not go your way at the end. Uh-huh. What was the reaction inside the company when that case failed?
So I can't find any documentation about that case. And I haven't really tried. My recollection, I was in court for several of the final days and the jury summations and all that stuff. I remember very clearly the judge explaining the Sherman Antitrust Act to the jury and everybody, so we knew what the law was. My understanding of the way that case went, which may be nothing but conflated misremembering, is really bizarre. So the jury is given a questionnaire, and they're supposed to answer questions. So the first question was, did Nintendo have monopoly power? And it had already been defined by the judge. And the answer from the jury was yes. So you go to the next question. Did Nintendo unfairly use its monopoly power to influence this other section where they didn't have a monopoly? And the answer was yes. Did Atari suffer as a result of this? Answer, yes. Does Atari deserve N million dollars? Or should Atari be paid N million dollars? I don't remember what the N was. As a result, the answer was no. We asked the jurors afterwards why they said no. And they said, because you deserved much more.
What? Oh, Jesus Christ.
So the question should have been, do they deserve remuneration? And the answer would have been yes. Then how should you define the amount? And then they would continue. But the lawyers asked the wrong question. I was going to use a less polite construction.
Oh,
and they said, does Atari deserve, should Atari be paid this amount? And the answer was no. So we lost. We had convinced the jury. They knew Nintendo had misused their monopoly power. They knew the monopoly power misuse was against the law. They knew Atari deserved money. But because of the structure of the questionnaire, we lost.
Oh, that's insane.
Now, my father did not believe in using the legal system as a way to run a business. That's why a Commodore had virtually no patents, because you don't use the legal system. So when we lost, he went, no, we're not going forward. This is ridiculous. Stop. So it didn't continue.
Oh, I mean,
but
sorry,
you can see what I said makes sense.
No, definitely. The lawyer in me is screaming right now, because normally, I mean, the only way, and California may have its own rules on this, but in my experience, the only way you would put an actual dollar sum at that stage of the trial is if it was by agreement between the respective parties.
Yeah, I was not involved at that level.
Well, between the lawyers. And the problem is that you would never, ever, ever in a million years do that, because if the jury, for whatever reason, decided that number was too much, you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Right. And if they decided it was too low, you're shooting yourself in the head.
Exactly. Oh, that's insane, because it was such a clear-cut case. It's so much of a clear-cut case that all the evidence points to the fact that right around the time when that trial is about to that the verdict is coming down,
right?
Nintendo for the first time actually makes a push to distribute in Europe. because they're afraid of the impact that case is going to have in the U.S.
Yep.
And that's the only reason they start getting a foothold in Europe.
So I can't confirm that my memory is correct, but that's what I remember.
Yeah, and that sounds about right given everything I've read about that case.
Yeah.
It's insane.
So we won the case, but lost it.
Crazy. Yeah, I've the going wisdom is that it was a screw up by the lawyers, that the lawyers messed that one up in a big way.
Well, that's how.
Yeah. Oh, that's crazy.
I mean, I don't know if the jury questionnaire is available.
The jury questionnaire would have been submitted into the record.
Right, but I don't know if you can get that stuff, because this is, it's pre-digital.
The question is, have the records been destroyed in the archive?
Yeah.
Or are they still in the archive?
And how much hassle would it be to find them?
The hassle's not the problem. Actually, it would be relatively easy to get those pulled. You would just have to go to the county where it was actually done.
Yeah, San Francisco.
Yeah. And as long as they haven't been destroyed through an archive purge, they would still be there. That actually would be an interesting pull.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if anyone watching this does it.
I'd love to see it. I would love to see it. Okay. Different topic, same era, the Lynx. Very impressive piece of hardware. Curiously enough, now several members of the Amiga development team worked on this piece.
Yep.
And now
RJ and Dave.
Exactly. Now the question I had here again is very software related, because the Lynx, very cool tech. Battery life, we can argue about pros and cons, but what was your strategy for developing relationships with publishers and software developers to bring games to the system?
Not done by me.
Okay,
that was a different group, but the same thing we had always done, so. It was people like Michael Katz and the like who had relationships with lots of third-party developers.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Yeah, it was pretty standard.
Okay. And was it obviously it's the launch of a new platform and it's a very different business model to computers where the manufacturer of the machine doesn't get a royalty for people publishing software on the system. But you had some experience with that already from the inherited systems from old Atari.
Right.
Was that seen as a good business to be in, a good business model, or was it just very, very different from what you were used to with the primary product being the ST at that point?
Well, we still had the 2600. We were still selling 2600s. There was lots of money coming in as a result of the 2600. So we were familiar with the business model. And of course, Nintendo was there and they were apparently doing pretty well in that business. So it's pretty obvious that as a going concern, it was possible.
Good. Now, between 92 and 94, Atari does a big transition from being primarily a computer maker to a console maker.
Right.
And I've looked at the annual reports for those years. And the strategy being laid out of transitioning out of computers and going into consoles, especially with the Jaguar coming down the pipeline. Now, how involved were you with that transition and the development of what would become the Jaguar?
Very.
Okay.
We gave up on the computers. It was not working. We could not find a way to make it work. We needed to figure out a way to do stuff.
Now, there was also before we get deep into the Jaguar, there was a dalliance with Atari branded IBM clones.
Sure.
Was that something that ever had a chance of taking off, or was that?
I don't think so. That was a commodity business, very different than what our expertise was.
Gotcha. Now,
Dad's expertise was customized stuff where he could use his negotiating skills to get a low price that would make a market available that no one else could get into. Very different than a commodity.
Gotcha. And so going into the Jaguar, and before that there was the Panther, was the idea, and in the press releases at the time, it sounded very much simply like by the time the Panther would have been ready to go, it wouldn't have been cutting edge enough to cut out its own segment of the market. Was that how you perceived that decision?
No, so the Panther. So the Panther was the result of a funny wrinkle in the semiconductor availability history. DRAM became really, really scarce. It was hard to get enough DRAM. So Dad came up with the edict: you shall make a video game that uses no DRAM. So a few of us sat around and came up with a design that used no DRAM. It used 32K of SRAM.
Okay.
And used a modification of a concept out of the Atari 8-bit machines called an object-less processor to construct the video graphics buffer a line at a time on the fly. So there was no screen RAM. So there was no need for DRAM. So all the graphics was in ROM. And you could have a lot of ROM for different configurations. And you could place these things and scale them at any spot on the screen. And the guy in charge of hardware, who came in after Shiraz had left, knew some folk in England who could do this design. And a very clever guy came in. So one of the people that had worked on the ST had started the design of this. He quit because he wanted to go back to Texas. And this guy from England came in, and he finished it. And simultaneously, his business partner in England was working on another video game system. And they said, do you want to market this? You're interested in cutting edge new technology. We said yes. He incorporated the object-less processor idea out of the Panther into the Jaguar, what became the Jaguar. And we had two machines in parallel. We viewed the Jaguar as much more risky. Lots of new technology. The Panther was a pretty darn neat machine, but it should just work. The first Panther chips come back, they don't work. But the Jaguar was looking really damn good. So we dropped the Panther.
Ah, okay.
I have never seen a working Panther. I wrote the development system for it, but I never saw a working one. As far as I knew, none existed. Although apparently there were a couple. Jeff Minter had one.
Okay.
But the chips didn't work unless you did something really funky, and I never found out what that was. But we dropped it because the Jaguar was looking much more certain.
Gotcha.
And it was clearly superior in every way.
Gotcha. Now the Jaguar, if I understood it correctly, it's a dual CPU system. And
CPU system.
Tri-CPU, that's what it was. And it's using a 68,000 in there to coordinate the two main chips.
So all three chips can get to everything.
Okay.
And the idea was you use the 68,000 to get stuff going and to do things that aren't time critical, and the other two do the important stuff.
Gotcha.
This particular computation model was very hard for people to wrap their heads around. And because of hardware problems, writing software to automate that process was infinitely more difficult than it should have been. So what wound up happening was people used the 68,000 as the main processor, and that crushed system performance.
I was about to say, I mean, you had the big standout titles like Alien vs. Predator, an amazing port of Doom, but then you had a lot of stuff that just looked like it was straight ports of ST and Amiga titles like Syndicate and Theme Park, with no major upgrades that were probably just running off the 68,000.
Yep. So it was hurt by two things. One, it was really hard to make it work the way its designers intended because of some hardware flaws. And it was really easy to do it lazily. So people did.
Gotcha.
I remember John Carmack of id Software talking about listening to our description of the hardware for the Jaguar. And when we described the color map, his eyes lit up and went, "This is perfect." He just loved the fact that they were in a 16-bit per pixel graphics architecture. There were 8 bits for brightness, so he could do smooth brightness drops. He was just, this is perfect. And that's why there was a fantastic port of Doom. Because he saw what you could do and did it. It was awfully easy to use the Jaguar as an ST with slightly different hardware. And unfortunately, a lot of people did.
Yeah. And I guess that makes my next question about the relationships with developers for the Jaguar and getting them to really invest the time necessary. What must have been an uphill battle then.
So there were a couple of problems. One was, so I was highly occupied with ST software. The hardware developers were in England, and they had close association with software developers there. And they had decided that they would have a development system built by the people that wrote the pack-in cart, Cybermore. And when we got that development system, we couldn't get it to work. It was this massive, convoluted, complicated thing. It was based on assumptions about the way the hardware worked, and the hardware didn't work the way it was supposed to. I said there were some bugs. So literally in a weekend, a few people, including myself, designed a software development system based on the ST. And we literally did it in a weekend.
Oof.
So the same guy that said the Imperial Stormtroopers are arriving had written a brilliant 68,000 assembler, which I modified the source code and turned it into an assembler for the two non-68,000 processors. And then we had a 68,000 assembler that we used for the ST. And then we did linkers and did downloadable cartridge emulators. And we got it working in a weekend. And that became the development system that people got. And a development system that you develop in a weekend is not polished. And we tried to get it improved, but the answer we got was, does it work? Yes. Okay, it's done.
Oh, who made that call?
He's related to me. And it wasn't clear who could do it better. We assumed that other developers would come up with things and they would sell to each other, which they eventually did. And there were other development systems that came up. But I don't know which problem was bigger, the fact that we had a non-polished development environment or that the hardware didn't do what it was supposed to do in the first place, was the bigger problem. I think it was the hardware not doing what it was supposed to do in the first place. The Jaguar, as it came out, was somewhere between 30% slower and a factor of 3 slower than it should have been.
That's
because of a couple of design flaws. And in some cases, so the system was designed to be able to run. So the GPU, the processor in TOM, was supposed to be able to run out of main RAM or out of external RAM. And you were supposed to be able to use the blitter as a way to page software in and out. But none of that worked right because of timing problems.
Oh. Ooh.
And it turned out that for the sound processor, you couldn't run it out of external RAM, period. It only could run on internal RAM. Which I was the one that found that, and it took me a while to convince the hardware folk that this was actually a problem. And by then the machine was already gung ho. So there were a bunch of hardware problems with that machine, that I think, so the combination of hardware problems and to make it hard to do the way it was supposed to be done, and because the 68,000 was something that everybody was so familiar with, it was so easy to do things wrong or inefficiently or not new, really hurt the machine.
Yeah. It is kind of sad because if you saw something like Alien vs. Predator back then, it was so mind-blowingly interesting looking and ahead of what other consoles could do. It is really a shame that.
Yeah. So Jeff Minter.
Yes.
I don't know if you know Jeff.
Haven't met him,
Jeff.
but Attack of the Mutant Camels on the C64. Enough said.
So Jeff was, and I assume still is, a genius.
Mm.
And Jeff was invited to come to Atari to work on demos and startup for the
Jaguar.
For the Jaguar. And we were sitting, back to back in the lab, working on the two Jaguar prototypes. And, how do you do this? Oh, here's this. What are you doing here? Back and forth. And I remember he said, okay, I'm going to start seeing what I can do with this motor. And he, codes for a little bit and hits the button and looks up at his monitor and goes, oh, okay, I got a box. And then he manipulates colors and sizes and says, okay, great. All right. I'm going to make a multicolored box of, with the colors, slowly changing as things go, and I'm going to fill the screen. And he writes it, hits return, goes, crap. It must have crashed. Because it came back so fast. He never even looked up. Because it worked. But it worked so fast, he was convinced it had crashed.
Wow.
So when he said crap, I turned around and said, that's gorgeous. And he looked up and went, whoa. And he was absolutely absorbed at that point. And I don't know if you ever saw it, the VLM virtual light machine in the Jaguar CD. He wrote.
Yeah.
And if the world would be a far better place if everyone was as smart as Jeff. But if the creativity and the ability to go, all right, it doesn't work the way you designed it, but it does work. And people could take that view and use what was there, the Jaguar would have been a fantastic success. But not everyone is as smart as Jeff. Or as talented.
This is true. Now, there was one peripheral for the Jaguar VR setup. I have to ask, how far along did that actually get?
I had one on my head. I played a game. I did not throw up, but I really felt like I needed to. The lag was horrid. The frame rate was obnoxious. The resolution was revolting. The technology was not ready. Gotcha. It was as good as you could do at the time. But my God, was that a horrible thing to use.
Did you guys, was that a completely internal development, or were you licensing tech from somebody for that one?
Neither. It was third party contracted.
Ah, okay. Okay, so that was going nowhere. Now, I do have to talk about the end of Atari here a little bit.
Did Atari end?
Well, the end of this version of Atari.
It shriveled up and died.
Atari, yes. Well, I mean, Atari is still around today. Apparently, they're trying to make branded casinos or something. But
yeah, whatever.
Yeah. So they got Atari gets taken over.
No.
No. Okay.
Atari never got taken over.
Okay. Then clear up what happens, because as far as I've been able to reconstruct it, there's a settlement with Sega, and that is a financial windfall, and then suddenly Atari's got some cash in the bank, and that made it interesting for some outside investors.
No.
No. Okay. Clear it up, please.
So, the Sega thing happens. We have money. We are in the interesting position that we have lots of money and nothing to do with it. We have no future business prospects that look promising. Just as in 1992, we decided that we were not going to be able to go forward with the computer thing, we decided we were not going to be able to go forward with the video game thing. So Dad looked for something to do. And he found another company called JTS. The fact that his initials are JT had nothing to do with this. That other JT was Juggy Tandon. And JTS had the reverse problem. They had a product that they thought was going to revolutionize the laptop business, and they had no money. So there was a reverse merger where JTS and Atari merge. They become JTS, but use Atari's public corporation identity and go on from there.
Okay. And this is then the end of Atari as such. At what point does Atari decide, or JTS decide, to sell off the Atari assets?
That was the plan immediately.
Okay.
It took a while to find Hasbro and to settle on Hasbro. Hasbro was easy to find. And to get the deal. But yeah, that was a foregone conclusion. The only question was for how much and to whom. Gotcha.
And I have to then ask, I mean, obviously, you guys, this is an end of an era, because everything that starts off way back with the PET, or even with the calculators, this is an end of that type of operation. Does Sam, for example, stay at JTS? Is there any management?
Dad was on the board of JTS for a little while.
Okay. And so what do you decide to do at that point?
So, I'm an idiot. And I was completely burned out. I was fried at every level. So I came home and I hid. And for a year, headhunters would call and say, we have a job for this, that. Do you know anyone that is interested? And I said no, because I took them literally, and didn't realize they were asking about me, because I was too fried to notice. And after a year, they stopped calling. Sam and Gary continue to do high-tech investing and stuff. Yeah, I fell back into a couple of years later, like half a decade, into my initial passion, which is astronomy and science, and have gotten very interested in science advocacy and education. So I spent a decade bashing my head against the California Department of Education, trying to convince them of a frankly ridiculous idea, which is that textbooks should be accurate. And failed completely. Yeah, I before COVID, I was spending a lot of time up at a local science center teaching kids about science.
Very cool. Now, and I've read quite a bit about your advocacy efforts, and you also there's some really good videos of you talking about the critical role that skepticism plays.
Yeah, I'm on the board of one of the first skeptical organizations. I recently was elected to be a fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, which I am overwhelmingly shocked that I have been given that honor. It's really quite amazing to for my name to be on the list with Carl Sagan and James Randi and people like that. It's overwhelming.
And from what I've been able to see, deserved.
Well, thank you.
Even if it's overwhelming. Sorry. As former treasurer of the Humanist Atheist Society at University of Florida for several years as an undergrad, good job.
Thank you. Thank
you. I do have a question, because you've dealt so much with education, because you've seen the evolution of computer tech. You've talked, there's a TED talk where you, somebody asks you several questions and you talk about how humanity would be improved. And I'm paraphrasing you, but humanity would be improved if everybody had the humbling experience of trying to make a computer do what it's supposed to do through programming.
Yep.
Something to that effect, which, yes, as somebody who has very, very limited experience with programming, but just enough to really appreciate what it is, I wholeheartedly agree with the sentiment. But my question is, what role do you see modern computing having in promoting the goals of critical thinking and improved science education? So modern computing as it exists today.
So I think it's twofold, and they're very separate. One is making the information available. And if you know how to look and you know the difference between real and bullshit, and it's really hard to know the difference, there's a lot of really good information out there. And computers have done that. It's great. It's marvelous. The other problem is people don't have what Carl Sagan called in his book, A Demon Haunted World, or Science, Candle in the Dark. That's the subtitle for The Demon Haunted World. A baloney detection kit. And computers can help people learn how to tell baloney from real stuff. And critical thinking is an incredibly important skill. As a skeptic and as a fellow of this organization now, I can't overstate the importance of understanding both the power of intellect and the importance of expertise, but even more importantly, the limitations of the way the human mind works and how easy it is to become overwhelmingly convinced of something that simply isn't true. And it's easy. And the more ridiculous it is, the more powerful the need to believe it becomes. And if people would just realize, I don't know. I just don't know is an acceptable answer. In fact, for almost every question worth asking, the right answer is, I don't know, and neither does anyone else. But we do have a way to figure it out. Let's try. If people just could absorb that and see how to do it, the world would be a far better place.
Amen on that one.
It sounds so easy.
It does. It just goes against that whole human evolution need to belong to a tribe instinct. Oh, yeah. Where as soon as you have a group of friends who are going to, well,
it's a combination of confirmation bias and tribalism.
Yeah. Okay, and I guess one final question, and I ask this of all my interview subjects. looking back at your career in the industry, what is one trend that caught fire that you didn't see coming? And what is one trend that you thought would be huge that never went anywhere?
So I'm going to answer a variant of the second one first.
Okay.
Not a trend that I saw that never went anywhere, but one that I desperately hoped would be important. And that goes back to what we were talking about just a little while ago, which is that people would actually use computers to learn to program. That the structure of having to put together a computer program and the way that trains you to think would be a far more popular or widespread phenomenon. So I remember walking around in the homebrew computer club with, people like Steve Wozniak. And, people are going to use these to program. They're going to learn to program. No, that isn't what happened. But I really wish it had. And a trend that I didn't see coming. The only person that I know in the computer industry that saw something like social media taking off, damn, his name just fell out of my head. Nolan Bushnell. I had a conversation with him in the late 1980s where he basically described social media and said, this is what computers are going to be used for. It's going to be a way to communicate online, and people will find people that think like they do and want to talk about niche subjects that they want to talk about. But in order for this to happen, we're going to have to get women involved because women are going to do this more than men. But when it becomes mainstream, everyone's going to do it. I didn't see it happening, but Nolan did.
That's actually deep.
Yeah. Nolan doesn't get a lot of credit for being deep, but he should. There are two things that he said. One was that, and the other, there was a movie about Atari called Easy to Learn, Hard to Master, which was his maxim for what makes a good game. And that's incredibly true. Easy to learn, difficult to master. And that's the way you get people into it, and they become obsessed. And he's right. He was right. He's still right. That's people. You give them something easy to learn, difficult to master. The fact that it's hard, but easy to get started. Wow.
True. Oh, man. Okay. Now I got something to chew on. Leonard.
To say nothing of 3 hours of video to edit.
Oh, don't even tell me. This will take ages. Probably have to break it up.
I hope this is at least 2 episodes.
It will be 2 episodes. I am milking this one. Leonard, it's really been a pleasure. Do you have any parting words for any fans of Commodore and or Atari?
I'm proud and humbled that people still value the contributions that my family and I made to the industry. And I'm glad that so many of the recollections people have are positive, and that the retro computer thing has created new fans that have new positive things.
That's awesome. Again, thank you so very much for giving me your time, your recollections, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. My life would not be the life it is today without your father. And I can't thank him, but I'm going to thank you as a proxy for that.
And to the extent that I can, I'll pass that on, which of course is non-existent. You are not the first person to say that or something like it. The number of people that have gone when they hear my last name, they go, I owe you my life. And I said, no, please. Yeah. So if I can tell you a funny story.
Please.
As part of the skeptic thing, I was in Vegas for what turned out to be the last TAM, the Amazing Meeting, which was put on by the Foundation for James the Amazing Randi. And at the same time, on the same weekend, there was Convex, the Commodore Vegas exposition.
Okay.
And I had been at Maker Faire and was at a retro computing set of tables. And a guy recognized me, and when it looked like he was going to fall to the ground and kiss my feet. But he didn't. And he asked if I was coming to Convex. And I said, what is Convex? And he told me when it was. And I said, I don't know, but I'm going to be in Vegas that weekend because it's the same weekend as TAM. And I thought nothing of it. A month or two goes by, and I look up Convex, do a Google search, and at the top of the page is the announcement that Leonard Tramiel may attend. That was top billing, not who was set, but that I may attend. So I went, and it was fun. And I come back, and I'm talking to one of the other people at TAM. I'm talking to one of the other people at TAM, and mentioned that I had been to Convex. And another guy says, "Oh, you went to Convex. I was going to do that. How much are the tickets?" And I said, "I don't know. They invited me, so I went." And he looks at me and goes, "Who the fuck are you that they invited you?" And he looks down at my name and goes, you're you. Yeah, it's a little bizarre, but yeah, people are invested, and there's an awful lot of very positive associations with Commodore and Atari and retro computing and things that were just sort of part of my normal life. Although I have realized that my life was far from normal.
That it was. That it was. Leonard, again, thank you so very, very much.
You are most welcome.
I hope you've enjoyed another Video Game Newsroom Time Machine interview. You can leave us comments on Twitter, Instagram, and if you like what we're doing here, drop us a couple of bucks on Patreon. All the links are in the description below.